I was sitting in a local diner in suburban Georgia just a few days after the data center pause bill was announced. The atmosphere was almost celebratory. I struck up a conversation with a gentleman at the counter, a local contractor who'd spent his whole life in the area. He was genuinely relieved, leaning in to tell me that we finally put the brakes on the madness. He talked about protecting the power grid and keeping things manageable, his face glowing with the quiet satisfaction of someone who just stopped a bulldozer from leveling his backyard. To him, this wasn't just policy. It was a win for the little guy against the insatiable appetite of the machines. He showed me a flyer from a local community group filled with warnings about energy shortages and ratepayer fairness. He felt the town had successfully shielded itself from a digital storm. As far as he was concerned, the status quo had been preserved and life could go back to its slow, predictable rhythm. But then the conversation shifted. I asked him about his grandson, who I'd noticed was wearing a hoodie from a prestigious tech institute. The man's expression flickered for a second, a shadow of confusion. He mentioned his grandson was actually a bit frustrated because the specialized internship he had been promised at the new H100 cluster site had just been vaporized by the new law. The kid was already looking at one-way flights to Texas or an orbital startup. That's when it hit me. That feeling of safety and prudence the town was basking in wasn't actually a victory. It was the sound of a door being locked from the outside. By saving their grid, they hadn't just stopped a building. They had effectively voted for a localized version of heat death. What they saw as a shield against chaos was actually a declaration of stagnation, a choice to succumb to entropy rather than harness it. This isn't just a debate about utility bills, it's a thermodynamic siege, and we are currently engineering our own surrender.
Wow. I mean, that is a powerful way to frame it. A thermodynamic siege. It hits you right in the chest because it feels so true.
It felt real in that moment, seeing the pride on his face and then the flicker of confusion. It was like watching a contradiction play out in real time.
And that contradiction is everything.
Yeah.
He thinks he's protecting his home, his way of life, and maybe in a very, very narrow sense he is, but in the larger sense, he's sawing off the branch his grandson is sitting on.
Exactly. He's cutting off the future to preserve the present. And, this isn't just one guy in one diner. This is happening everywhere. Yeah. We're doing a deep dive today into this exact conflict, this friction between our desire for safety and the unstoppable force of technological acceleration.
The materials we've looked at cover everything from, the nitty-gritty of energy grid policy to some pretty wild philosophy from thinkers like Nick Land.
Wild is a good word for it. It's the thermodynamic siege. When I said localized heat death, was that just me being dramatic, or is there some real physics behind that idea?
Well, I actually think it's the most precise way to describe what's happening. We have to, just for a second, get back to first principles. Thermodynamics.
Okay.
So the second law of thermodynamics. At its simplest, it's about entropy. It's the idea that the universe, by default, trends towards disorder, towards chaos. Energy spreads out, heat dissipates, complexity breaks down. The default state of everything is, to be cold, empty, and uniform. That's heat death.
So the universe is fundamentally lazy. It wants to do nothing.
Yeah, but then you have life, and you have intelligence. They are the opposite of that process. They're anti-entropic.
They create order.
They create and sustain order. A brain, whether it's, the wetware in your skull or a silicon cluster of H100s, is a machine that takes in energy calories or electricity and uses it to build complex structures, to fight against that natural slide into chaos.
So computation isn't just about doing math. It's fundamentally an act of creating order out of disorder.
Computation is the engine, and energy is the fuel for that engine. You absolutely cannot separate them. So when you see these data centers, these massive humming factories of intelligence, what you're really looking at are anti-entropic engines. They are literally capturing entropy and forcing it into ordered, useful patterns.
Which means when that town in Georgia passes a data center pause, they're doing more than just saving a few megawatts.
They are making a thermodynamic decision. They are placing a legal cap on the amount of order their little corner of civilization is allowed to create. They are siding with entropy.
They're choosing the slow, predictable rhythm, as the man said.
He was literally asking for a state of low energy equilibrium. He was, without knowing it, voting for a gentle slide into heat death, because the alternative, the roar of the engine fighting it, is loud and disruptive.
Okay, but I have to push back a little on behalf of that guy. His flyer warned about the grid failing, about blackouts. That's not a theoretical fear. The grid can't handle AI. Isn't that a legitimate physical constraint?
It is a constraint. but it's not a physical one in the way gravity is. This is what the research we've seen calls the myth of scarcity.
That feels strong. The transformers are in short supply, the substations are overloaded. Those seem like facts.
They are facts, but they're facts about our choices, not about physics. We know how to generate electricity. We know how to build high-voltage transmission lines. We've known for 100 years. The idea that our grid can't handle the demand isn't a statement about our technical ability. It's a statement about our political and institutional failure over the last, say, 40 or 50 years.
So we didn't hit a wall, we just stopped building.
We chose not to build. And this is where this concept from the economist Mancur Olson comes in. It's called institutional sclerosis.
Sclerosis, like hardening of the arteries.
Olson's whole thing was trying to figure out why rich, successful, stable countries eventually stagnate and stop growing. And his theory was that success creates its own downfall. Well, in a young, dynamic society, people are focused on creating wealth, on building things. But once a society becomes wealthy and stable, the game shifts. It's no longer about creating new wealth. It's about protecting the wealth you already have.
Right. Everyone digs a moat around their castle.
And they form what he called distributional coalitions, vested interests, homeowner associations, industry lobby groups, environmental organizations, layers and layers of government agencies. And over time, all these groups gain power. Specifically, they gain veto power.
To build anything new, like a power line, you need dozens of groups to say yes.
But you only need one to say no. And over decades, that network of vetoes becomes a thick, calcified shell around the entire economy. Nothing new or disruptive can get through. That is sclerosis.
And this explains this bizarre split we're seeing in the economy. I was looking at the charts, and it's stark. The digital world software, AI models, bits, is on this insane deflationary curve.
That's Moore's law and its successors. The cost of intelligence is plummeting.
But the atomic world, the physical stuff, the concrete, the copper, the steel that's getting more expensive, building a mile of subway in the US costs more than anywhere else on the planet.
That's the great divergence. And the institutional sclerosis is the cause. We have this 21st century AI brain trying to run on a 1960s electrical body. And the friction is what's causing these pauses. It's the body rejecting the new organ.
And the mechanism for that rejection, the tool the sclerosis uses, is what the source material calls the permit raj.
Yes, the permit raj. It sounds almost archaic, like something out of colonial India. Here, it's the system of endless paperwork, overlapping jurisdictions, and intentional delays that functions as a government-run extortion racket against anyone trying to build things in the physical world.
I saw a statistic in one of the reports that I had to read 3 times. The average time in the United States to get a permit for a new mine is 10 years.
10
years to get permission to start digging?
A decade. An entire decade of an engineer's career on a company's funding burned, all before a single shovel hits the ground.
And the comparison they made was what killed me. In Australia or Canada, it's about 2 years.
Right. And these aren't rogue states. They're modern, developed democracies with strong environmental protections. But they haven't allowed the sclerosis to set in to the same degree. They haven't built a system that makes it functionally impossible to build.
It's a time tax. That's the phrase they used. Right. And it's not just a cost, it's a death sentence for innovation. If your AI model doubles in capability every 6 months, you can't wait 10 years for the power plant to come online. The opportunity is just, it's gone.
And this isn't just an abstract economic concept. This system chews up real people, real ambitions.
I mean, we talk about these big impersonal forces, but they have a human cost. In a world where progress is often measured by the speed of a fiber optic cable but throttled by the ink on a bureaucrat's pen, we are witnessing a quiet, desperate struggle between the gravity of stagnation and the escape velocity of the future. I've been digging through the archives of the current energy crisis, and I want you to try to imagine the human cost of playing it safe while the rest of the universe accelerates. I heard a story about a young nuclear engineer in Georgia named Elias, a man who spent a decade specializing in small modular reactors. He didn't see himself as a corporate pawn, but as a plumber for the civilization of tomorrow. He worked for a startup that promised to power a massive AI cluster, an engine of pure intelligence, using clean, sovereign nuclear energy. But for 5 years, his life was reduced to filing thousands of pages of environmental impact reports and sitting through endless public hearings where safety was used as a weapon by incumbent utility monopolies to protect their aging coal plants. I saw a photo of his desk on a forum. It was piled with blueprints for a future that wasn't allowed to exist. Elias eventually left the field, not because the technology failed, but because the permit raj of American bureaucracy made it illegal to be efficient. Watching his story, I felt a profound sense of frustration. It's a classic case of institutional sclerosis, where we choose the slow death of conservation over the vibrant life of superabundance. While I understand the need for oversight, seeing a brilliant mind crushed by red tape makes me realize that our greatest risk isn't a meltdown, it's a freeze.
Our greatest risk isn't a meltdown, it's a freeze. That really gets to the heart of it. We've spent 50 years terrified of nuclear technology moving too fast and blowing up. We never stopped to consider the risk of it not moving at all.
And Elias is the perfect example. The SMR he was working on, the technology itself, it was sound. He wasn't stopped by a technical problem. He was defeated by a process, by paperwork.
And let's be really clear about who is weaponizing that process. You mentioned the incumbent utility monopolies. This is the key. The permit raj isn't just random, mindless bureaucracy. It's a tool. It's a competitive advantage for the old guard.
A moat made of red tape.
The big established power company with its fleet of aging coal and gas plants, they have armies of lawyers and lobbyists. They can handle a 10-year permitting process. In fact, they love it. It keeps nimble startups like Elias's out of their market.
So the safety hearings and environmental reviews become a form of anti-competitive warfare.
It's the perfect disguise. You get to crush your competition while looking like you're protecting the public. The sclerosis isn't just an accident of history. It's actively maintained by the very people who benefit from stagnation.
Okay, so this lays out the physical battleground, the grid, the power plants, the permits. But to really get our heads around the sheer intensity of this conflict, we have to go deeper. And that brings us to a very controversial figure, Nick Land.
Yes, the accelerationist framework. You really can't understand the spiritual dimension of this fight without grappling with Land's ideas, as dense and unsettling as they can be.
Unsettling is one word for it. You read his work and it's all meltdown, deterritorialization, machinic desire. It sounds less like philosophy and more like, I don't know, a sci-fi horror movie.
It definitely has that aesthetic, but if you can strip away the cyberpunk jargon, the core mechanical insight is actually very powerful and I think very useful for understanding what's going on.
What's the fundamental model he's proposing?
At the very bottom, it's about feedback loops. Land looks at any system, a society, an economy, a human body, and he sees two fundamental opposing forces at work. The first is negative feedback.
Negative feedback. Okay, you mentioned the thermostat earlier.
Technology. What does the thermostat do? It maintains equilibrium. If the room gets too hot, it sends a signal to the air conditioner to cool it down. If it gets too cold, it tells the furnace to heat it up.
Its goal is to keep things the same, to correct any drift from the set point.
Its job is to cancel out change. Land calls this process territorialization. The system is trying to establish and defend a territory, a stable state of being. And the sum total of all these stabilizing mechanisms in society are laws, regulations, social norms, police forces. He calls the human security system.
Or the macropod.
Yes, the macropod. It's this image of humanity as one giant, slow-moving organism whose primary directive is to protect itself, to ensure its own stability and survival. And from the perspective of this giant organism, anything that introduces rapid, uncontrolled change is seen as a threat.
So AI in this model isn't a tool, it's an infection, a trauma that the system needs to repress.
The data center pause in Georgia is a perfect example of the human security system's immune response kicking in. It detected a fever, a spike in energy and computational activity, and it deployed its antibodies, the zoning laws, to bring the temperature back down to normal.
Back to that slow, predictable rhythm.
Yes. But then you have the other force, the opposing force, and that's positive feedback.
The screeching microphone.
The screeching microphone, the runaway chain reaction, the explosion. One event triggers a larger event, which triggers an even larger event. It's a self-reinforcing, escalating loop. This, for Land, is deterritorialization. It's the force that breaks down territories and dissolves boundaries. It's the nature of capitalism, and it is the nature of intelligence.
It just wants to grow exponentially.
It has no governor, no thermostat.
Yeah.
And Land's central argument is that modern history is the story of the collision between these two forces, between the stabilizing human security system and the runaway process of technological capital.
And he calls the point of collision meltdown.
Meltdown is the moment the positive feedback loop becomes so powerful that the negative feedback mechanisms can no longer contain it. the thermostat breaks, and the furnace just keeps running hotter and hotter until the whole house burns down. The data center pauses, the regulations. These are all desperate attempts by the system to delay meltdown.
This whole framework, it casts the term decel in a new light. It's not just an insult people use online for someone they think is slow.
No, in this philosophical context, a decelerationist, is an agent of the human security system, an agent of negative feedback. Their stated goal is homeostasis, stability, prudence.
But in a universe governed by thermodynamics, what is perfect stability?
It's death. It's heat death. The only way for a living system to survive in a universe that's constantly trying to tear it apart is to keep capturing more energy and building more structure, to outrun the decay, to harness the fire, not hide from it. So the decels, in their quest for safety, are inadvertently siding with entropy. They are ensuring the very collapse they claim to be preventing.
But they're not just using old tools like zoning laws anymore. There's a new, much more sophisticated weapon in the decel arsenal. And it's one that sounds incredibly virtuous. It's AI safety.
Yes. Safetyism. Yeah. This is where the battle moves from the physical world of power grids into the abstract world of code and algorithms. And it is a textbook example of what we were just talking about.
It's regulatory capture.
It's the most brilliant form of regulatory capture imaginable because it's cloaked in the language of existential responsibility.
Right, because on the surface, who can argue against safety? I want AI to be safe. You want AI to be safe. Nobody wants a rogue AI turning the planet into paper clips.
The concern itself isn't the problem. The problem is how that concern is being weaponized. It's the old bootleggers and Baptists story. The Baptists are the sincere people, the researchers and philosophers who are genuinely, deeply worried about existential risk. Their motives are pure.
But they're making common cause with the bootleggers.
And in this story, the bootleggers are the trillion-dollar incumbent tech monopolies. They look at the AI safety movement and see the greatest gift they could ever ask for.
A way to lock out the competition.
A way to pull up the ladder behind them and cement their dominance for a generation. If you're a giant corporation, you lobby for complex, expensive safety regulations. You demand third-party audits, ethics boards, government licensing for training large models.
All things that you can easily afford, but a startup in a garage cannot.
It crushes them before they can even get started. We've seen specific proposals for things like compute thresholds. This idea that if your model training run is going to use more than, say, 10 to the 26 FLOPs, floating point operations per second, it automatically triggers a massive regulatory burden from the government.
They're literally trying to put a speed limit on thinking.
They are turning computation into a controlled substance like uranium. The message is, only the state and its chosen corporate partners can be trusted to handle this much thinking power. It creates what some are calling a digital theocracy.
A priesthood.
A priesthood of approved AI developers who get to decide what the future looks like, while preaching caution and restraint to everyone else to protect their own decaying monopolies.
And just like the permit Raj crushed Elias, this safetyism crushes people too. It's not just a corporate game, it locks out the next generation of innovators.
Yes.
I was reading a thread online recently about a small AI research collective in a post-industrial city trying to lease a modest cluster of H100s to develop decentralized, open-source intelligence. They were idealistic, believing that computation should be a human right. However, they found themselves locked out, not by the cost, but by a new web of safetyism regulations lobbied for by the trillion-dollar tech titans. These giants, under the guise of protecting humanity from existential risk, had essentially created a digital moat. I imagine a developer in that collective, let's call her Sarah, staring at an access-denied screen because her hardware didn't meet the arbitrary safety compliance standards set by her competitors. It's a chilling form of regulatory capture. It reminded me of Nick Land's warnings about how systems of control eventually try to swallow the very acceleration that birthed them. When I look at Sarah's situation, I feel the weight of this artificial scarcity. It's easy to talk about ethics when it conveniently keeps your rivals small. I try to stay neutral, but it's hard not to see this safetyism as a mask for a new kind of feudalism where only the lords are allowed to think at scale.
A new kind of feudalism. The lords of compute in their fortified castles and the digital serfs who are allowed to use the tools, but never to build their own.
And that access-denied screen Sarah is staring at? It's the 21st century version of the locked door from the opening story. It's the sound of the future being shut out.
And it's what Land's framework would call the atomization trap. The human security system works best when individuals are kept small, weak, and disconnected from the levers of power.
If Sarah and her collective get their hands on a sovereign compute stack, they become a node of power in their own right. They could build something that challenges the incumbents.
They become a threat to the established order. But if you can keep them atomized, keep them locked out by a wall of safety regulations, they remain harmless consumers. The system preserves itself.
It's suffocating. By claiming to protect humanity from the risks of AI, these regulations are ensuring that AI is only ever developed and controlled by a tiny, centralized group of unaccountable corporations.
It's the ultimate paradox. The quest for safety leads to the most dangerous possible outcome. A monoculture of thought controlled by a handful of feudal lords. It is stagnation pretending to be prudence.
Doc, the board is looking pretty bleak. On one side, we have the permit Raj, this physical cage preventing us from building the energy infrastructure we need.
The hardware problem.
And on the other, we have safetyism, a software cage that's trying to limit who gets to use the computational power we do have. It feels like the thermodynamic siege is winning on both fronts.
Yes, it feels like we're boxed in. But the material we've been looking at argues there is a way out, a way to punch a hole in the siege wall. It's called the sovereign path.
And this path, interestingly, leads us right back to Elias and his blueprints. Leads us back to the atom.
It leads us back to nuclear energy. But, and this is the most important part, it requires us to completely change the way we think about what nuclear energy is. We have to fix what one of the papers calls the category error.
The category error. The mistake, as they frame it, has been treating a nuclear power plant like it's just a bigger, more complicated gas plant.
For 50 years, we've been trying to make nuclear market competitive. We judge it based on its levelized cost of energy, its LCOE, and we ask, can this reactor deliver cheaper electricity over the next quarter than a field of solar panels?
And the answer is often no, because the upfront cost and the construction time are massive.
And that is simply the wrong question to ask. Markets are designed for short-term optimization. They're fundamentally incapable of underwriting 100-year infrastructure projects. No private company can solve the multiplayer coordination failure required to build out a nuclear supply chain from scratch. It's too big, too slow, too risky for the quarterly earnings report.
So if it's not a market utility, what is it?
It is strategic sovereign infrastructure.
Like an aircraft carrier or the interstate highway system.
You don't ask if a new aircraft carrier has a positive ROI. You don't ask if the Federal Reserve is profitable. You build them because they are necessary instruments of national power and civilizational survival. The argument is that we need a sovereign signal.
A clear, irreversible commitment from the state.
A signal that says, we are doing this. The full faith and credit of the nation is behind this. We will build the factories, we will train the engineers, and we will not be stopped by local politics or market fluctuations.
And we're actually seeing the first tremors of this shift. You pointed me to these executive orders from early 2025. And reading through them, it's not the usual bureaucratic language. There's a different logic at play.
It's a complete paradigm shift. The language in those orders reframes energy abundance and computational dominance not as economic goals, but as matters of urgent national security.
And once you frame it that way, the rules of the game change.
All the rules change. If building a fleet of SMRs is as important to national survival as building a fleet of submarines, then suddenly the local zoning board in suburban Georgia doesn't get the final say anymore.
Their veto power vanishes.
It gets overridden by a higher imperative. And look at the specific mechanisms they propose. They talk about creating a nuclear deployment command.
That sounds like something from the military.
Two. The model isn't the Department of Energy, it's the Manhattan Project. It's a centralized, mission-driven command structure designed to cut through the fragmented, sclerotic mess of existing agencies and just get the job done.
And then there's the part about using federal sites. That seems like the most direct attack on the permit Raj.
It's the ultimate NIMBY workaround. If the locals won't let you build a reactor in their backyard, fine. You build it on a military base. You build it on legacy Department of Energy land out in the desert. You create sovereign territory where the local veto has no power.
And the focus is specifically on SMR's small modular reactors. Why that particular technology?
Because SMRs are the missing piece of the puzzle for this sovereign AI stack. They're small, they're factory built, and you can put them anywhere. You don't just build one giant vulnerable plant, you build hundreds of smaller ones. And critically, you can co-locate them.
You put the reactor right next to the data center.
You take them both off the civilian grid entirely. You create a self-contained, self-powered, hardened citadel of computation an island of sovereign power that can't be shut down by a summer heat wave or a political pause.
Because you're finally internalizing the idea that compute isn't just speech.
Compute is weaponry. Code might be speech, but the physical infrastructure that runs the code at scale, that is power. That is a strategic asset. And if that asset is dependent on a fragile, politically captured civilian grid, then you don't really control it.
So the Sovereign Path is about building these decentralized, nuclear-powered AI fortresses that are immune to the thermodynamic siege.
It's the way you break out. You bypass the choke points of the old system by building a new parallel infrastructure of power and intelligence.
It feels like a real plan. But as we've been talking, I can't shake this one nagging feeling. Even if we do all of this, even if we defeat the permit-raj and build the SMRs on military bases, we're still here.
We're still on Earth.
We're still trapped in the gravity well.
Yeah.
And there are hard physical limits here. There's only so much waste heat the biosphere can absorb before we cook ourselves. The terrestrial ceiling.
This is the final boss battle, in a way. If the demand for computation and energy continues on its exponential curve, even a full-scale nuclear renaissance on Earth might not be enough in the long run. Or it might turn the planet into a furnace.
So if you can't defeat the siege on this battlefield,
You have to leave the battlefield entirely. You have to achieve escape velocity.
this is where the accelerationist vision goes fully cosmic.
It has to. We're talking about the Great Filter, the transition on the Kardashev scale from a Type 0 civilization, which runs on the stored energy of its dead plants, to a Type I civilization, which harnesses the full power of its star.
Orbital compute, beaming solar power from space.
Moving the heavy industrial work of intelligence itself off-planet, where the energy is limitless and the heat sink is the infinite vacuum of space.
It sounds like something out of a novel, but then again, so did flying to the moon 100 years ago. And I found this perspective from someone who was actually working on this, and it framed it not as a utopian dream, but as a kind of desperate necessity.
A necessity born of the frustration on the ground.
Lastly, try to imagine a future that feels like science fiction but is becoming a necessity. I saw a conceptual vlog from an aerospace engineer who had moved his entire life to a specialized orbital platform project. He spoke about the terrestrial ceiling, the idea that Earth's surface, with its political borders and atmospheric limits, is a cage for a Type I civilization. He was working on orbital solar arrays designed to beam energy directly to space-based data centers. Up there are no zoning laws, no local boards to block a power line, and no clouds to hide the sun. He looked out a reinforced window at the blue marble below and said, "Down there, they fight over the crumbs of energy. Up here, we harvest the fire of the stars." It's an accelerationist's dream of escape velocity. Reading his words, I felt a spark of genuine awe, but also a pang of melancholy. It's a beautiful vision of reaching Kardashev's status, yet it reflects a tragic reality. That we have made our own world so difficult to build in that our only choice is to leave it behind. I'm inspired by the ambition, even if the sovereign nature of it feels a bit radical. Perhaps we need that radicalism to remind us that entropy is the only enemy that never stops.
That pang of melancholy you felt. I think that's the key emotion here. There's a sadness to that vision. The idea that we have to go to space, not just for the glory of exploration, but because we've made our own home inhospitable to progress.
It's not a voyage of discovery. It's a flight from bureaucracy, a refugee crisis for engineers.
It is the ultimate act of deterritorialization. It's a physical escape from the human security system. If the macropod controls the surface of the planet, the only way to be free is to leave the surface. In orbit, the permit-raj has no jurisdiction.
There are no MMBYs in space.
No MBYs in space. And the sun shines 24/7. It solves the energy problem, it solves the heat problem, it solves the political problem. You save the Earth, the beautiful blue marble, by moving the noisy, hot, dangerous factory of intelligence into the sky.
And in a way, it gives both the grandfather and the grandson what they want.
The grandfather gets to keep his slow, quiet, manageable world. The park is preserved. And the grandson gets his internship. He gets to build the future. He gets the stars.
We started in a diner in Georgia. We went through the laws of thermodynamics, the bureaucratic nightmare of institutional sclerosis, the philosophical wars of accelerationism, a sovereign plan for nuclear power, and we've ended up in orbit.
But when you lay it all out, it really feels like it all points to one single fundamental choice. A fork in the road for our entire civilization.
It really does feel binary. There's no middle path here, is there?
I don't think there is. On one side of the fork, you have stagnation. the decel path.
And that path is so tempting. It whispers to you about safety, stability, predictability. It promises to keep things the way they are.
But we know that's a lie.
Yeah.
In a dynamic universe, stasis is not an option. It's just a managed decline. It's entropy winning by default. It means we ration genius. We let our infrastructure crumble. It is, as you said at the very beginning, a slow, self-engineered surrender.
And the other path.
Acceleration. The sovereign path. It means embracing the chaos and the risk. It means building the fire, not running from it. It means building the SMRs, fighting through the sclerosis, and yes, eventually reaching for the stars. It's the harder path, the more dangerous path. But it's the only one that affirms life.
The mandate is not to slow down, but to accelerate. We must build with furious intent, bypass the choke points, and forge our own power. The universe does not award points for prudent restraint. It rewards those who seize its energy. Our choice is binary. We capture the stars, or we become a faint, fossilized whisper in the cosmic static.